Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Welcome to Profile. At the heart of it, the Coalition for a Better Future is concerned about Canadian prosperity. Formed in 2021, its purpose is to rally decision makers to work together with the hope of bringing about positive changes by getting leaders in government, in business, and in society to focus on the country's economic well-being. It makes the argument that without economic well-being, Canada would never be at its best. Unable to pay for priorities like social programs, unable to secure stability or a future for the next generation. Of course, the last year has been tumultuous for Canada. Donald Trump's return to the White House ended a decades-old notion that Canada could always count on the United States as a reliable trade partner. Now, in response, Canadians elected a new Liberal government led by former Bank Governor Mark Carney, a Prime Minister who has said Canada must fundamentally reimagine its economy both here at home and abroad. It's against this backdrop that the Coalition released its 5th annual scorecard report at the end of March, an annual report that measures how Canada is performing on key long-term economic, social, and environmental goals. This year, the Coalition gave the scorecard a definitive title, saying it was time to execute for the sake of the well-being of all Canadians, a goal made more urgent by the economic challenges now facing the country.
Optimistically, I'd like to think that things are getting better and that one day we're going to wake up and everything is going to be fine. But we're not there yet. We're not seeing it come out. I hear lots of planning and I hear lots of changes, and I'm very excited by hearing all these kinds of things, responding to external forces. But the numbers don't lie, and the impacts of the numbers we're beginning to see, I think, in decisions being made in businesses across the country. And that's kind of what worries me. Even though we're all looking forward towards what could be really great, we have a trough we've got to come out of, and the numbers that we see here are beginning to really crystallize how deep that trough is.
Companies are going to have to step out. They're going to have to take the risks to diversify, as our Prime Minister's been talking about, right? Where are those new markets? Where are the markets that are growing around the world? And actually, that market is not the United States, certainly right now in terms of a growing market. It's Asia, quite honestly. It's India, it's Asia.
That problem, to me, can only sustainably be solved by executing, getting things done, to build the capacity for our economy to create companies and jobs that go with it in communities across the country, not just in big cities, but in rural areas that play to our strengths so you can build strong communities. I think that's the only way out of this.
Now, those were just some of the opening thoughts from the scorecard report that was released last month. With more, here now are Lisa Raitt and McLellan, two former politicians who now co-chair the Coalition for a Better Future.
We've spent some considerable time, and we as a coalition, 5 years, as you've mentioned, talking about the importance of economic growth and what needs to happen in this country to have that growth in productivity, GDP, other metrics that we measure. And we've seen the past year in which Prime Minister Carney has very much been talking about economic growth, that it's time for us to become a more resilient economy, building Canada strong, if you like, the Prime Minister's tagline. So for us, when you look at the numbers, it's time to execute. We have signed more comprehensive trade agreements, over the past 20 years, really. How beneficial have they been to the Canadian economy? I think what we see is this past year actually setting a much sharper focus in terms of what has to happen in this country to get the economic growth, the inclusive, sustainable economic growth we all want. Hence, we call this year's report Time to Execute, from ambition to execution.
Okay, and Lisa, I want you to connect the dots, if you will, because reading through the report, what stood out for me was this line about the fragility of the Canadian economy now being felt by Canadians. I think Canadians clearly understand that they're paying more at the grocery store, they're paying more at the gas pumps, they're paying more for just about everything. But how is that tied directly to the fragility of the Canadian economy?
Yeah, so for the last number of years, we've been measuring, as you pointed out, and what we've been seeing is that we're not doing really well on the economy. And that may not have been noticed right out of the gate, but when you have something like what's just happened to us in terms of the United States taking such different points of view on what it is to trade with Canada, putting tariffs on us, making it more difficult, more expensive to do trade, that's when something hits really hard, and it hit the economy hard. It's a shock that hit our already declining economy. That's why you're seeing it show up today in such a big, stark way. It's like it came out of nowhere, but the decay was already happening. It's just this external shock came in just to throw it completely off kilter. So like Anne says, we really have known this was happening for a while. We're pleased that all parties are talking about long-term economic growth. It's a great thing, but talk only gets you so far. And we really have this moment in the crucible where if we don't do something, all is going to be lost. And I don't want to be, dramatic about it, but we only have a certain amount of time to be able to rate these things in the right direction so that Canadians can feel comfortable about our long-term efforts.
Okay, let me pick up on points that both of you are making, because to your point, and to build resiliency, we have seen the Prime Minister consult with different levels of government, bringing in the premiers and speaking to them more frequently. His government has dropped federal barriers to interprovincial trade, although the provinces are still having to do something about that. He is signing deals, as you point out, and MOUs with countries beyond the United States. What else do you want to see here?
Well, I think it's fair to say, Lisa, you and I talk fairly regularly about regulatory reform, for example. And look, we are not advocating for getting rid of all regulations. As we discussed this morning at an event at the Telfer School of Management, regulation plays an important role in terms of the public safety, public health, support and protection for the environment. So no one's advocating getting rid of regulation. It's about smart regulation. It's about figuring out in really industrial sector by industrial sector in some cases, what are the regulations you need to ensure public health, public safety, protection of the environment, and perhaps a few other things. And focus on those, make sure that people understand and are certain about those, and hopefully that they won't change whenever, if there's a change of government. But focus on that kind of smart regulation. People can take it quite literally to the bank. That's one of the things that I think, and we think, requires a lot more attention going forward. You've also mentioned interprovincial trade barriers. We have a lot more work to do there, and most of it now rests with the provinces and the territories. You mentioned the federal government has in fact removed those barriers for which they're responsible. But we are leaving billions of dollars annually on the table because of interprovincial trade barriers. So it's really time for the provinces. They've started good work, but it's time for them, maybe with the help of the Government of Canada, to figure out where the most costly of those barriers continue to be. And there may be winners and losers, maybe helping with the losers and ameliorating their situation, but that work really needs to be done. And it is pretty low-hanging fruit.
Okay, so that's what more you'd like to see. And Lisa, what would you say?
What I would say is, when we talk about pivoting to new trade, which is something that we have to do, and Anne pointed out all of the deals that have been signed over a number of different governments, I think what we have to remember is we don't have a heck of a lot of time. So suddenly we're on the world stage and we're saying, hey, we really need to do trade with you, and the Asian countries are going, yeah, so why? What do you bring to us? What's so important? It's not enough to say, we're Canada. We actually have to have something behind it. We have to develop a warm relationship. That relationship is built government to government. You can't expect the private sector just to announce themselves and arrive and say, here, we're to sell stuff for you. It's not the way it works. So one of our members is the Asia Pacific Foundation. Jeff Nankowal was at the conference today, and he points out, this is a constant effort. We have to make sure that bureaucrats bureaucrats, that politicians, business leaders, we all visit, we go in, we get to know the country that we want to have more sales with, India, China, Vietnam, Korea, wherever it is over there. We actually have to do a lot of work in order to make sure that people want to trade with us, and we want to be good traders. Carolyn Wilkins was there today too, and she pointed out the Dutch are really good traders. This is why they're doing a lot better than we are with a much smaller country size than we have. So we got to up our game, and that's, I guess, time to execute, up our game. If you want to divert our trade to different countries, then we really have to be hustling, and that's what it comes down to. It's not complacency, and it's not enough to be nice, and it's not enough to be not the United States.
Okay, listen, I'm going to pick up on that because I did try to book you for Primetime Politics, a few weeks back, and you couldn't attend because you were in Singapore.
I was.
And you were there for the Canada in Asia conference.
That's right.
So talk to us about what you heard at that conference, because you say you can't just walk in, but at the same time, there is interest in Canada if Canada can meet the moment, correct?
There is interest in Canada. So we've got a great narrative so far. Our reputation is we are safe, we are trustworthy, we are rule of law. That's great. But they also want to know, well, what are you going to do for me? Because, it's not just enough to say you want our goods. They have to say, okay, well, are you going to invest in our country? Are you going to help us create jobs? Are you going to do something for us? That's where the government comes in. But the opportunity is immense. I mean, the population size, the number of people going into the middle class. And a great statistic we heard today, as you know, was think about how the world has changed from what our grandparents used to buy and what we buy today. That's exactly the same transition that's happening in India. As the economy moves from being more on the development side as opposed to middle class, where's exactly where they're heading, the tastes and what they want to purchase changes. We should be part of selling those goods to India, but we got to be there now, and we got to show that we can deliver to them on a timeline that makes sense for them.
Okay, and
that is a really important point, because I think absolutely Canada, as the PM says, Canada has what the world wants and needs, but we have to be reliable, right? People have to be able to look at this country and say that you have the supply chains within the country to get the product we're buying to port, and that the port is not on strike or shut down, or that the railways have the infrastructure they need to move the product to the port. And our report speaks to the fact that this reliability, we have had so many shutdowns of key infrastructure lately over the past couple of years, that in fact people looking into the country from outside will ask the question, are you actually reliable suppliers of what we want to buy from you? And I think that's a key question that we're going to have to address going forward. And there are no easy answers to that.
Yeah, so obviously it will involve government. It'll involve examining the regulations that exist, but it also involves the private sector. And I want to read here a statement that I pulled from the report. This is page 4 of the scorecard report. For those of you that have a copy, quote, ultimately the heaviest responsibility rests with the private sector. While the current environment is highly uncertain given the geopolitical context, it is up to corporate boards and management to move beyond hesitation and embrace the risks required for genuine innovation. So this is an appeal to the private sector, but I've heard this appeal to the private sector for decades now, that they have not been investing enough in this country. They would rather invest outside of this country. How do you turn that around?
You make their dollar that they want to invest have a good ROI. That's what it is. And we have great products.
Return on investment.
And that's what we have in this country. We have great products. We have an incredible workforce. We are safe, secure, rule of law, all those great things. Yes, they should be investing here in Canada, but when we make it too hard for them to do so, then they're going to put their money elsewhere. They're going to send it to the United States, or they're going to send it anywhere else. I do believe that Canadian companies are very patriotic, and they do want to do business here, but sometimes governments, including hers and mine and the ones that we have now, make it a little too hard for them to be able to do those kinds of things. And their directors and their shareholders say, why don't you find somewhere else to invest? And I look at our pension plans. They don't invest a heck of a lot here in Canada. Why? because we don't have the projects for them to invest in. Well, we should have the projects for them to invest in.
And that goes to another aspect of regulation. You talk about health and safety and the environment, but there's also the regulations that people have pointed out gets in the way of development, gets in the way of building infrastructure. Is there enough of a response to that? Because, you know, the Prime Minister did talk about build, baby, build, going to move at a speed that we've not seen before.
Look, I think one of the things that we do need to be honest about, build, baby, build. But the reality is that to build, you have to deal with a lot of stakeholders. Yeah. And whether it's a municipal project, provincial or federal. And I think to suggest, and I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that the PM is not fully aware of the complexity of those stakeholders and the consultation that has to happen. We focus, quite rightly, on Indigenous consultation in relation to many big, especially natural resource-based projects. But there are many stakeholders, even if you're building an 8-plex in my neighborhood in Edmonton, Alberta, there are stakeholders to consult before the city will give you your permit. So these projects will take time, and what we have to focus on is whether the processes and the timelines are reasonable.
Correct.
But we live in a country where stakeholders have a voice, and they have a big voice. And if we try and push them to one side, we know what they'll do. They'll go to court. And therefore, we will be tied up for even longer in relation to getting a project over the line. So yes, build, baby, build. But I don't think we can suggest that that is somehow a process that ignores the degree of consultation that is built into almost everything we build in this country. And people can complain about it, but it's a reality, and if we don't take that reality up and do it properly, we end up just making the situation worse for everybody.
Although the scorecard does point to a possible solution here when it talks about equitability, this idea of sharing of the wealth, and that would go towards reducing the poverty gap, getting more representation on boards of directors for women, for racialized Canadians, for Indigenous Canadians. So if one keeps equitability in mind, that could what? Perhaps speed up the regulation process if an example of consultation would include Indigenous ownership?
The core of what we wanted to make sure was that as we build, baby, build, that we take into consideration that we want to have growth in a different kind of way, more inclusive growth, right? Long-term, more inclusive, sustainable growth is what we're looking for. So that's why we measure those kinds of things, to make sure that everyone is part of the benefit going forward. One of the greatest ways that Canada has figured out to ensure that we're having good inclusion on these major resource projects that are going through First Nations property, Indigenous properties, is by making sure that they have an opportunity for equity in the project should they wish to purchase it. And one of the people we had today was the CEO of the Canadian Indigenous Guarantee Fund. Got it, I messed up the word. The Loan Guarantee Fund, yeah. The Loan Guarantee. And they were there to talk about the fact that they are there to help to make sure that investment can flow when you have your Indigenous equity piece solidified. Let me tell you, Canadian companies are more than happy. Foreign companies are more than happy for that to happen because they just want to have certainty of a deal going forward. When we talk about how stakeholders need to be consulted, 100%, but not for an infinite time, right? There has to be a stop. People get that. There has to be. The competitive nature of our world is how quickly can we get to a yes or a no on a project. Maybe that it's a no. Maybe it's a no, and that's cool too, but it can't be a 13-year maybe.
Let's also talk about champions, though, because we do have in this country companies that are succeeding. More narwhals, these high-tech companies that are valued over $1 billion now. And the question is, who takes it to the next level, and who not only takes it to the next level, but makes sure it does not leave this country, that it continues to grow in this country. Can you say anything about champions?
You've actually talked about two of our metrics. Yes. One is the narwhals, which are companies, startups over $1 billion. In fact, that's one of our most positive metrics. We've already met our 2030 target. But then when you look at another metric we have, Canadian champions, our target is 40 global champions, top 10 by market cap by 2030. Our goal is 40. We have 20, right? And they are RBC, no surprise, CIBC. They are Shopify. We have those 20 top 10 by market cap. But what happens, where's the gap, right? There is a gap, and I think this is probably your question in terms of the $1 billion startup. They end up being sold in so many cases, right? They're sold to a larger company in the United States or Europe or Japan, wherever. And in fact, what we need is to ensure we have the conditions that those billion-dollar companies will stay in Canada and feel that they have the support and the means to become a $5 billion and then a $10 billion company. And then if you're the Royal Bank of Canada, many hundreds of billions of dollars, right? And there's this gap. And these startups are innovative. They're the people who take an idea and develop it and create new platforms that we barely imagine, new products that the world will need and want to buy. But then someone in the United States, for example, comes along and says, I'll buy your company. And all of a sudden, we've lost that innovation. We've lost, in some cases, the very people who built that startup. And we cannot afford to do that. So we have to figure out, and one of our panelists today was talking about this, angel investment, and then beyond angel to other more mature levels of venture capital and investment. And we have to make sure that we're doing what's necessary to keep those startup companies over $1 billion in this country, and that they become the champions. And why are champions important? They carry Canada's brand around the world, so that in fact people anywhere in the world see a brand name. Well, let's take one. I mean, Lululemon, for example, or Shopify, right? These are brands that carry the Canadian brand, not only their own brand. And they present an image of innovation, of risk-taking, of getting out there and taking on the world. That's why champions, national champions matter.
Yeah, that's true. Ann and I trade charts back and forth with one another on text. And one of the charts that I shared with her yesterday was a startling one, which is talking about Canadian founders. And where are Canadian founders starting up their companies? For the first time ever, there are more Canadian founders starting companies in the United States and Europe than they are in Canada. And it's been a ramp down like this over the past number of years. So we have people saying, I have a better business environment in Canada, in the US or in Europe, even though I'm a Canadian, to start a business, and that's where I'm gonna go. We have to figure out how to stop that.
Okay, I'm gonna pause this right now. Well, we're not really pause, but move it forward, because we have identified a lot of the challenges. Yeah. Right, the challenges that this country faces. But in the report, there's also a positive aspect of the report, because you believe Canada has what is needed to turn this around. Not only that, to leverage it to the benefit of this country. How do you do that? What's the advice you're giving out there?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it is what we're starting to see, which is that level of cooperation, and dare I say even trust, between the government of Canada, the provinces, and the territories. Prime Minister Carney's held more meetings over the past year with the provincial and territorial premiers than probably in the past 10 years. You build that level of cooperation and trust. What are the barriers that, working together, they can identify? And we've already talked about some in terms of the interprovincial world. And then it's also building partnerships out, building trust with the private sector. Because while I often accuse the private sector in Canada of being complacent, I also understand it's a risky business, right? And you can only take so much risk, and your shareholders are only willing to let you take so much risk. So in that context, context, I think it is, again, governments working together to create the infrastructure writ large, where in fact companies feel that they can trust. They can trust the outline, if you like, the governmental infrastructure, the regulatory infrastructure, the tax structure, right? That they can trust that, and that they can have candid conversations with government about what they need to take the risks to grow the economy. And we're seeing progress, but it is a work in progress. We're not there yet, but I really think that we're starting to see significant progress in that regard.
Okay, so some progress there. What do you think the top line advice should be for anyone that's listening to this conversation?
Find a project, get it built, and show the market that it can get done, period. That's it. Find a market, get it built. When LNG came online, everyone said, oh, you're never going to fill the pipe, it's not going to happen. Guess what? We're going to have it filled. Trans Mountain, same question. The Haisla project is going to come online in a couple of years. We're going to see that booming. But we got to do it now. You got to prove to the market that you can get a project done, built, financed, approved, all that. I got that in the wrong order, but you know what I'm talking about. And moving the product to a place other than the United States of America. Yeah. And that is going to be the key. And just get it done. And that, we didn't even mention agriculture and the importance of agriculture and opening up those markets and making sure that we're delivering on our goods there the way that we have always done so, but continue to do so. But talking is done. Execution is now, and they pick a project and just show us that you can get it done. And that is a lot of cooperation. And maybe the government needs to have an oversized role in it at this point in time, but you do one, then the rest of them will come when they see their return on investment.
Our thanks to the co-chairs of the Coalition for a Better Future, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Lisa Raitt and former Liberal Deputy Prime Minister Anne McLellan. Now you can see the full scorecard event on the CPAC website. And for now, I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. We'll see you again on the next episode of Profile.